Hello and welcome to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, joined as per usual by my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe. And Dan, I am very excited about today's show because unlike many of our shows, I'm going to be outnumbered by columnists rather than you being outnumbered by reporters.
And the funny thing is that we actually, as columnists in Rhode Island, we fit in a telephone booth, and so it's fun. But no, in all seriousness, our guest today is awesome and is literally the first person I called when the Globe came to me and asked me to be a columnist to say, how do I do this job?
Well, I want to get more into that, but before we launch into that, we'll bring in our guest, Mark Patinkin of the Providence Journal. Mark, welcome to Behind the Story.
Great to be here with you, Eli and Dan. And I remember that call.
Yeah?
Yeah. And you've been doing great ever since.
You told them that he should do it?
I said run for the hills, man. Run for the hills, because they'll start shooting at you. As soon as that's the thing about being a columnist. As soon as you're putting your point of view out there, that's the, divisive age we live in. You get shot at, but, that's part of the game.
You bring up a good point, though, Dan, and we have a bunch of things we want to get into, but maybe just to start, I think it might be helpful to lay the landscape of columnists in Rhode Island, because as Dan points out, there are not that many. Mark, you've been doing it for what now, 4 decades?
Since the
right?
Franklin Roosevelt administration.
Oh my! And how many columnists were working then?
Back in the day, we probably had a half dozen or more in the Providence Journal, maybe more still. Now I'm the last man standing, last columnist standing, I should say. Mm-hmm. Though there's others we have that have a point of view. Gail Ciampa does a point of view in the food area. But in terms of general columnists, just one now, and it used to be a common genre at most papers.
Did you feel was it competitive among your colleagues to write the thing that people were talking about? Is it harder now to do it sort of by yourself?
Yeah, I mean, you like we said earlier, you get a lot of incoming when it's just you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the beautiful things about column writing is that you guys do get to express your views and your opinions in a way that reporters are supposed to sort of set that aside when they launch into a topic. And so readers can really get a sense as to how you feel about a certain topic, or whether and your opinions often will sway public opinion and often legislation and legal matters. And so it's really, really important work. And I want to bring up a specific example that's happening right now in Rhode Island, which is the issue of hazing in schools, because you both, Dan and Mark, wrote separately about this issue because there were 2 incidents recently at Smithfield High School and in Newport High School. And Mark, I'll start with you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you really wanted to make the point here that adults, the kids, sure, they made bad choices, mistakes, but it's really, there's a responsibility on parents and adults in their lives that are also failing.
Yeah, I see. It's great to see that Dan focus as much on the students, and there's a little part of me that thinks, especially more so in Smithfield, Newport was just absolutely dreadful at Rogers High. This actual attack, Newport. I think there may be some nuances there around just how brutal the kids meant that to be. But in either case, my feeling is that this is a failure of parents. And in particular, I just got right down to it, instead of the generic parents, it's coaches. I think coaches have the power to be able to sit kids down in a football team or a comparable situation and say, look, if any of you haze a kid, you're off the team. And if you haze a kid in a certain way, they could shut down our season. Do you want that to be in? Coaches can do that. They have the power. And I just have to think those conversations have not been happening in Rhode Island. Coaches just haven't been sitting kids down and putting what I wrote, put the fear of God factor on them. And I think you would probably shut down most of these incidents.
And Dan, you took a slightly different approach, but same sort of idea, same incidences. And you wrote that sort of a provocative headline that the high school sports needs a, quote, death penalty. Can you walk us through what exactly a death penalty is?
Yeah, I'm good at headlines. I'm a sensationalist, right? But no, honestly, I agree with Mark completely on this. Look, I coach sports and coach kids for a long, long time, and I think it does start with it starts obviously with parent value and family values and that kind of stuff. But coaches are the ones that instill fear in you to forget if it's hazing, it's if I don't run hard, I'm going to sit the bench, those kind of things. So I think all that stuff is true. What is unfortunate, and the reason I wanted to write a column that was pretty provocative, was to say we're obviously not getting that type of treatment from the coaches, and so I do think you need to have more accountability and a system in place. And I said death penalty. What I used that off of was, of course, in the 80s, the SMU college football team got the death penalty from college football. Their program was shut down. They were paying players. Now that would be legal, but they were paying players doing repeat violations. And to me, when I was particularly, as Mark said, I was particularly upset about what happened in Newport at Rogers High School, right? In Smithfield, it was, I think I agree, it was a little more nuanced, but still there's no place for it. And the argument that this was, it wasn't anti-Semitism, it was just old-fashioned hazing, didn't seem okay to me. And so I felt like there is power here. The legislature could step in and say, hey, we want a policy in place that says if you get caught doing this, you're done. Program done. Whether it's a year, more, however, I think you should have some policy in place, because that's the way to keep kids from continuing to do it.
Yeah, and after Dan's column came out, which came after Mark's, there was actually movement at the State House where Representative Joe McNamara said that he would be filing legislation this session, which begins in January, that would create some sort of rules around hazing specifically. Here's what the representative had to say about it.
In the state of Rhode Island has seen some very unfortunate incidences, and also they've seen the way two different school systems handled those incidences. And what we're looking for in this legislation is a very clear and transparent policy where every student, every coach, every teacher, every administrator knows that our state has a zero tolerance for this type of behavior.
So, Mark, I'll ask you out of that. You have seen a lot of legislative sessions come and go, and often there can be these sort of sparks that happen in our communities and our society that then spur some call for change legislatively. But then, maybe there won't be a hazing incident, or there won't be an incident at school for 6 months, and we're on to the next thing. Do you see this as something that, will stay in the limelight, if you will?
Yeah, it's a good question about whether, it depends on whether or not there are other incidents. I will say I was a little shocked that these things keep happening. I kind of thought we've had a anti-bullying conversation for a decade, for 2 decades, for more, and that's kind of now the new norm in high schools in particular, that kids have their conscience raised about bullying, but obviously not. And there's been some national stories lately too about some terrible ongoing fraternity incidents. I think a recent one where a student committed suicide after he was kind of pushed around for months by his fraternity brothers. And so it just maybe the legislation could work, but I'll just go back to what I said at the beginning. I've been on a lot of teams, and if a coach sat us down at the beginning of the season and said, you guys, you pull anything, you lock a kid in the bathroom, or God forbid you hit a kid, you are off the team and the season shut down. I'm telling you, coaches have that power, probably even more than the legislature. And it's been clear that all the anti-bullying conversation still isn't doing it. I think you need coaches to bring down the hammer every season.
All right. Well, we have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be talking more about columns in the news. Stick with us. Hello, welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, joined by my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe. And our guest this week is Mark Patinkin, longtime columnist at the Providence Journal. Dan, Dan, you had some topic that you wanted to delve into.
Yeah, Mark, one of the things I admire about you is that you pick your spots pretty carefully, I would say, about when to take kind of a controversial opinion. You write a lot of really good sort of, I think I would call them more human interest columns that, are might be tear-jerking, might be hilarious when you write about your, being a father and things like that. Sort of resonates with me as a young father now.
Well, I definitely have my children for material.
Right, obviously. Clearly. It's the number one. That was your advice to me, was to have a kid.
Have kids. It's good material.
But when you do choose to weigh in on something, whether it's a polarizing topic or something pretty controversial, you really go in on it. And of course, a couple of years ago, after the October 7th attacks in Israel, you wrote a series of columns, and then it ended up leading to a book. You ended up visiting the Middle East, but that was pretty polarizing. And I think you divided a lot of people in Rhode Island over everything you were writing. You were pretty, I would say, strongly pro-Israel in a lot of ways. Yep. What was the? I don't ask why did you write it, but I'm curious, when you were getting all the incoming about it, did you stop to reflect about, hey, am I wrong here, or was it you felt strongly and you just kept going?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I have to say that even after 40 plus years as a columnist, getting a lot of incoming, and I'm always getting, I remember some specific attacks I've gotten, like Mark Patinkin is thoughtless, tasteless, and humorless. I resented that. I'm not humorless, okay? But I still kind of have a little bit of a thin skin. I think we all do.
Sure.
It's people would say, I've got to fix it. So I was called after I wrote some columns defending Israel, days after October 7th, before Israel had gone into Gaza. A Providence City councilman called me a disgrace to humanity, a Brown University fellow who has a national podcast with, I think, 100,000 or more listeners, said I was repugnant, and then he attacked the Journal when I went to Israel, and they said he's a propagandist going over to Israel. And it was withering, I will say. And these people, these folks put the attacks on social media and got hundreds of likes. And it was, but I'll tell you, it didn't sway me. It didn't make me question what I was saying, because I think, as we all seen, this is such a polarizing issue. But it was the foundation of why I decided to go to Israel, because I felt that I was doing armchair commentary. And now the whole world, every day, if you look on Instagram or Twitter, everybody's an armchair commentator on this Middle East divisive issue. And I felt, as an old school journalist, I should do that. I should just go. And so I went. And I went on the ground, and I resolved to check my allegiances at the door, and I immersed in both sides. I was only non-Palestinian face on the West Bank for several days. I went into Gaza. I talked to Gazans, and guess again, you know what? All those people that attacked me for being pro-Israel, not being showing enough of the other side, I never heard a word from them after the series came out, and then the book came out. That really, I think, was, especially the book, which showcased the Palestinian side very fairly.
Yeah, there's no question. The book, especially, I think, was a very well balanced book. And you're right; it's disappointing. I guess that's the business we chose, though, right?
Yeah.
Well, I got a question for you out of that, Mark, because I feel like, their media literacy in general seems to be very low. And especially online, you see something that Mark Patinkin wrote or Dan McGowan wrote, and it comes under the masthead of the Providence Journal or the Boston Globe, and they see that it's opinionated. You take a point of view on an issue, and then you have all these voices in your head that say, oh, news is biased, fake news, all these things. And you say, well, of course they are. Look, they're making an opinion right there. How do you handle sort of even educating readers or people online that what you do is different than what a reporter does, who might go to Gaza and approach it slightly different or write about the conflict in a different way?
Surprisingly, it's a great question, Eli. Surprisingly, and this gives credit to the public and the readership, I think they get it in a case like mine. If you're a long time, and you probably feel the same, Dan, if you're a long time figure as a point of view writer, as a columnist, people kind of get it and they expect that from you. So, readers are sophisticated, and they get the difference. It doesn't mean they're going to attack me any less, but they get the fact that I have a podium to be able to express a point of view. And so there's some hope around people seeing the nuances of the difference between a reporter and a columnist. I feel that anyway.
Do you feel the same way, Dan?
Well, on one hand, for me, one challenge has been that traditionally, if you go back through the recent history of journalism, it was getting to be a columnist was almost like a promotion, right? You worked the city desk and then you became a columnist. And in some ways, I view that as my trajectory in my career, right? I covered Providence City Hall for years. I sat in those city council meetings for hours and hours and hours, really got to understand how the city works. And then I immediately made a switch to giving my opinion. And so suddenly, people who I was covering as the so-called straight reporter, I was now saying, boy, that person's, a windbag or something like that. And I think that's been a little bit shocking to the people I cover, to maybe some of the audience. But I agree with Mark to the larger point that, I do think people, generally speaking, understand what we're trying to do. And I think I would now kick it over to you in some ways, Eli. People who want to yell about the news and want to criticize reporters, they find plenty of reasons to criticize you as biased when we know you're not either. And so in some ways, it's like if Mark was a straight news reporter, I think he'd still get criticized. I think I would still get criticized. So we're just doing it with our opinion. We wear it on our sleeves. We're open to that criticism. I push back a lot, and so just willing to take it,
I will say that there's one difference. When you're a reporter, and I remember those days, and people disagreed with you, they'd say, you are dead wrong. When you're a columnist, putting your personality out there, and people disagree with you, they say you're a disgrace to humanity. So it gets very personal.
Yes.
It does get personal when you're...
Well, and they take it, it was funny to expand on that and take it one step further. The people you cover, I covered Providence City Hall. We had lots and lots of, minor and major examples of corruption. You wrote straight news stories about what people were doing. People gave you the benefit of the doubt. The minute it's your opinion, it's you don't like me. It's all personal, right?
Yeah.
It becomes that kind of thing.
Well said.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have with you, Mark. But for people who want to read much more about his work, go over to the Providence Journal. He does a terrific job, as does everyone over at the newspaper. Mark, thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Story.
Thanks, Eli. And
All
thank
right.
you, Dan.
Thank you.
When we come back, the stories we wish we wrote. Stick with us. Hello and welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, joined by my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe, entering into the final stage of our show, where we look at other great reporting that's been happening around the region, and we brag about it. So, Dan, I want to start with you. Take it out.
I'm going to be the hometown guy here with my colleague Amanda Milkovits at the Globe. And of course, Amanda was a longtime Journal reporter, but Amanda.
Yeah, we need to get her on here.
Yeah,
ASAP.
Amanda's been covering this wild story. It's basically a family kind of separation trial that has all kinds of twists and turns. Involves the mother who passed away. She had cancer. Her parents, so the child's grandparents, both doctors. The grandfather, her father, was prescribing all kinds of medications, both for her and for this little child. And so there's the husband does not want his child to be able to have any visitation with these grandparents. It's sort of a really sad kind of heartstringy kind of story. But then all these twists and turns about the prescriptions and the way it has all played out has just been wild. Let me tell you something, because you and I both care about web traffic. Mm-hmm. This is the most read story in the entire Boston Globe over the last couple of months.
Well, to your point, I Amanda's been doing such a terrific job covering this, breaking it and then covering it. It's funny when I get news alerts from the Boston Globe, when I get one that's Rhode Island focused, I'm always like, oh, I've already read that story. And then I'm like, oh, that's because one of the reporters here on the ground wrote it and I read it quickly. That was one that came out, which usually signals to me that it's not just something that resonates with Rhode Island readers, but more broadly with the Boston Globe community.
Look, family issues have no boundaries, right? And so this is a story that could play out anywhere in the country. I think that's why it's resonating so much.
Mm-hmm. In a different realm, one of my stories this week is as winter heating costs rise, so does consumer anxiety in Rhode Island, poll finds. This is by Alexander Castro of Rhode Island Current, who does terrific work over there, as do all of his colleagues. And this is looking at Rhode Island Energy, which is one of those, the utilities is something that people in Rhode Island will talk about no matter what.
Yeah.
But he did it in a unique way where there was a sort of a political poll that comes out of UNH, but it also asked some questions about heating concerns and overall concerns, and heatings was one of that. He dovetailed it into a broader concern over Rhode Island Energy wanting to increase rates overall, and heading into winter, they're always higher. People are struggling. It's just one of those, annual stories that he found a new way of sort of focusing in on and showing it in a different light, and he did a really good job of
It's kind of the perfect way to use polling for a story, right? It's not just, we love the horse race of the politics. And that poll, of course, had the thing that all of us covered was the governor's race. Good job by Alexander to actually read the poll and say, boy, there's actually a bigger story here that's going to affect way more Rhode Islanders than, a horse race between the Democratic primary candidates in 2026.
Right. Although we'll read that day
Every day.
out.
Every day. Please poll more.
Yeah, please poll more. You had one from our pal John Howe.
Yeah, I love this story by John Howe. He did a really good job of breaking down this Warwick school budget fight. You and I kind of giggle at this because we love budget battles and
For sure.
in cities and towns, whether it's Massachusetts or Rhode Island. But Warwick has had this ongoing fight over whether or not the city should kick in more money to the school systems. Very similar to the Providence fight. But what John Howell did a really good job of was, he went and talked to the teachers union there. Warwick Teachers Union, very tough, a lot like the Providence Teachers Union. They've been known to have demonstrations. They, of course, many years ago had a big strike. And so John did a really good job of breaking down kind of all sides of it. And there's no real clear solution about what's going to happen.
Yeah, John, every time John writes something, it's a really important issue to that community because he's been doing it for such a long time. I'm going to get one last one in. We don't usually get them all in, which is pretty exciting. This is John Latinen. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, with the Providence Business News. It's called Broken News, Outlets in Search of Sustainable Community Journalism Model. And apropos to this show, it's a whole look at the current state of news in Rhode Island with a specific focus on independent organizations that are trying to make it work outside of the traditional media landscape of TV and newspapers. And so, Steve Alquist, who we know very well, is featured as the sort of main character at the top of it. And it's a really good look at the entire industry. So well done, John, there.
Yeah, we should have John on at some point.
Yeah, for sure. That is all the time that we have, unfortunately. But if you want to check out this episode or any other episode, you can go to WPRI or YouTube. We also now have this as a podcast, so go download it wherever you get your podcasts. And next week, we will have a new guest on to talk about something interesting that's happening around the state. But for now, for Dan McGowan, I'm Eli Sherman. Thank you for watching Behind the Story.